Legacy Group, and we welcome you today to this symposium on strategies to support the adult reentry population during COVID, social unrest, and political uncertainty. As we are preparing for the next 2 hours, I would like to provide some housekeeping notes or pointers. When you are, please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. We also have a chat box for questions. We will be entertaining questions throughout the event, so please place your questions there. We will have a breakout session, and we will be randomly assigning people to those breakout sessions. We want to hear from you before we end this event. So those breakout sessions are very important. With that, I would like to just check with Summer to see if I've missed anything.
We're good to go. Thank you.
So today we want to examine the health and racial disparities that exist among men and women who are under the community supervision, and work together to identify some responses to address their mental, physical, and also their spiritual needs. We have a dynamic speaker and a dynamic panel who will give you their expert perspective on many of these issues that I've just outlined. Some of them will be coming from their own personal experiences as someone who may have been under the criminal justice supervision, but nonetheless, they are all experts on this panel. So with that, I would like to introduce our host, Dante Blue, who will provide an overview and an opening remarks.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Carol, and thank you to you and your team for partnering with us. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dante Blue. I'm the acting director of our Office of Reentry and Justice here in the probation department of Contra, Costa County. I'm just so glad to see you all here today, joining us for this event. We've been working with Jeweled Legacy for a couple years now, really thinking about what are the ways in which this office can support everyone out there doing the hard work of assisting individuals as they go through their individual reentry processes. So we've had opportunities to work one-on-one with agencies, and what we wanted to do this year was actually put on a series of symposiums where we would actually reach out to several of our partners, try to find some issues that were of the moment and useful, and create a space to discuss those and work through those so we can have this shared learning environment. And as we all know, we're in this midst of this pandemic right now. And so I think today's topic, really thinking about health and wellness for the people who we work with, for ourselves, the people who we serve, is of utmost importance at this point in time. This is something that I think in the conversations that I've had, a number of people have kind of really wondered, well, what are people going through? We're in this situation where we're being told to kind of put ourselves in social isolation, and that doesn't impact everybody the same. And so what are some strategies that we can think about as we're thinking about trying to get our services to people in the midst of a pandemic? What are the things that they may be going through? What are the resources that exist out there? These are several of the questions that come up in the conversation that I've had. So over the next several months, we'll have multiple of these symposiums trying to address issues similar to this, dealing with not only the adult population, but we'll also at some point look at our young people up to age 25, again, to try to help ourselves think about how we provide services to all of these justice impacted population. So again, I want to thank Jewel for their partnership and leadership on this and helping organize today's events. I want to thank all of our speakers, our panelists in advance for the wisdom that you'll bestow upon us. And I also want to thank our named partners, Health Right 360, leader of our Reentry Network in East and Central County, and also the Reentry Success Center in West County for the work that they did to help shape this coming into today. Lastly, before we get started, really the idea here is to create a space for conversation. We definitely want to bring experts in to bring additional perspectives to the table, but we hope that you all do join these breakout sessions and participate, because as Carol said, we really want to hear from you. We want this to be a dynamic event where you're able to get something and give something as well. But also, as I said earlier, this is the first of several of these, and so we really want to have the opportunity to build on today. So again, thank you all for joining today. We try to keep these real short to 2 hours so we can kind of get in and we can get on with the rest of your day. And so I'll keep my comments short as well. Thank you all and enjoy.
Thank you, Dante. It's always a pleasure working with you, and we appreciate your thoughtfulness and also your support in uplifting these important issues. So before we get started, we understand that human beings need many things to thrive and to do well. And one of those is a spiritual focus. And so we thought it was fitting to start with an opening prayer. And we've asked Reverend Leslie Takahashi from Mount Diablo Unitarian Universal Church to provide an opening prayer. Please go to the next slide. To provide an opening prayer for us. Reverend Leslie.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, Dante. It's good to see you again. It's so good to be with you in this very important work that you're doing on behalf of our community, for which we are deeply grateful. In this time, as we think about these issues, it is important for us, no matter what our tradition, to summon all that we consider holy and sacred among us. So I invite you, in whatever name you give to the holy and sacred, to just join for a few moments with me in this spirit of prayer, that deep ask which goes beyond our own resources to those divine resources beyond us. Spirit of life, God of many names, great mystery we may know only as the more. That urge which compels us to remember that the entire community of humanity is sacred. Please hear our prayer this morning. As we gather here for this important work, let our hearts be open to the fullest. Let us be able to remember that each member of the human family is sacred, that each person deserves safety, that each person deserves the right to pursue vocation and livelihood, that each person needs shelter and food and kindness and care, and that each person among us is worthy of our respect and regard. Let us who have too often borne the burden of understanding the long-term costs, the terrible human costs of our disparities, let us be here together, open-hearted, embracing the preciousness of all these lives for which we strive for a better and more just world. May this be our prayer, and may we make these intentions fully alive through our actions today and in the days to come. Amen, and blessed be.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Leslie, for helping us all align spiritually before we enter into this conversation. I appreciate your responding and sharing your prayer with us today. So as we go to the next portion of this morning, I would like to introduce a friend and a colleague who, in some places, next slide, please. In some places, does not deserve, does not, is not, introduction is not needed. But he is, as you will see, he does fill the room. He speaks truth to power. And he, as I see him and I observe him at various tables across the Bay Area and across the state, he always brings a perspective and a degree of honesty that is cutting. It also shines a light on stories and people who we often never hear. And so with that, I would like to introduce John Jones III from Justice Cities, who is the Director of Community and Political Engagement. John is a father of three, and he'll probably talk about his sons. But with no further ado, John Jones Jr., the third. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so very much. I want to start off by just thanking you, Carol, and your team for giving me this opportunity. And I'm also grateful for the previous speaker, Dante, as well as the ground in prayer from Reverend Leslie. Because as we begin in this conversation of resilience, it's going to require a number of things for us to get through this unprecedented crisis known as coronavirus or COVID-19. With that being said, my name is John Jones III, and as Carol shared, I'm on staff with Just Cities. I am also someone who is formerly incarcerated. I've spent roughly 1/3 of my life total incarcerated. And when I was released from prison in 2012, they have a saying that they tell people: when you get out, do good and good things that happen to you. And I was naive enough to actually buy into that premise. I thought when I come home, I'm going to be there for my kids. I'm a licensed aircraft mechanic. I learned my lessons. I'm ready to get back home and do the right thing. For the next 18 months, I experienced being both unsheltered as well as being unemployed. And I think very few people truly understand the mental, emotional, even the psychological toll of being told no as it relates to seeking employment and seeking housing. When you're trying to provide for your family, but you're constantly told no, based on a mistake that you may have made or possibly you may not have made. The point is, when you're trying to do the right thing and you're told no. So I want to be clear. When I shared that I was unemployed for 18 months, let me be clear. I did not look for work every day for 18 months. There's something within our nature. After a while, we begin to believe that that no is real. And then what happens is people will blame you. I had people tell me, you're not applying yourself. You need to work harder. And this relates to the concept of faith and religious institutions. I've had people tell me, oh, the reason why you're not getting a job is because you don't have enough faith. Talk about compounding trauma with trauma. But I do want to share some quickly on the concept of faith, because to me, that is a key component in my experience with resiliency. For me, as the Bible defines faith, it's believing in something, right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, based on the evidence of things not seen. Keep in mind, our experiences are our truth. If you're told over and over again, because you have a record, you can achieve something, that becomes true and real. The resiliency is the ability to look beyond that no, to dare to continue to believe that that yes is possible. But let me be clear, the possibility of that yes is not just something that happens in a vacuum. It's the result of hard work and dedication toward changing these systems. That's why I want to bring it back to the word resilient, because to me, I was sharing earlier, of course our people are resilient. If you're Black, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you're poor, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, if you're formerly incarcerated, your own experience have taught you the need to be resilient because you have already experienced oppression, isolation, being alienated. But I want us also to be mindful that we should not normalize that form of resiliency, because what it also does is normalize the oppression that forces us to be that way. That's why, depending on who uses the word resilient, I cringe. When a decision maker uses it, I cringe because I feel like it's absolving them of their direct responsibility to end those systemic forms of oppression that create the conditions that require us to have to go above and beyond. And furthermore, for those who are able to quote unquote make it, there's a tendency for some folks to say, if such and such was able to get a job, why were you not able to get a job? We have to end that way of thinking. We've all experienced under COVID-19, this unprecedented crisis and era. With everything that's been going on with state-sanctioned violence, police brutality, I also want to focus on the reentry barriers because there has been many people released from incarceration. And we know incarceration today is legalized slavery. They have a saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We have to keep in mind that when they quote unquote freed the slaves in 1865, there was little to no wraparound services. Sometimes we think of slavery simply similar to incarceration as just a purely physical phenomenon, right? Oh, you were just a slave or you were incarcerated. So just let people go and they would be all right. Wrong. We have to look at the conditions prior to incarceration and what occurred during incarceration. And most definitely what happens post-incarceration, because it's always important to remember that no demographic is a monolith. The challenges I have may not necessarily be the same as someone else. This is why we all have to have the humility to center the experiences of those who are going through. They're going through the oppression and going through these barriers because it looks different. That is always the first place to start. Because what happens is sometimes, and we use that word privilege, it's a privilege to not experience something, right? But we also have a saying, you don't know what you don't know. If we're going to achieve true justice and liberation, we have to start with centering the voices of those who have these experiences. So as of right now, as there are a call to release people from incarceration due to COVID-19, which I am supportive of, the thing that bothers me is there's not enough energy to address what happens when folks do come home. And as I always share, the will to survive will always outweigh the will to obey. Let me say that again. The will to survive will always outweigh the will to obey. I want us to also think about this concept of transformation, because as I always share, it can only happen, it can only occur from close proximity. When we bring people together in a space like we're doing right now, and we engage in discourse and dialogue about the various issues, that will bring us all closer to a place to where we can help people as they're returning home back to society, truly successfully reintegrate. And there are so many nuances to these issues. Let's take housing, for example. Majority of people you speak to will agree that housing is a human right. Where the conversation bogs down at is when it relates to solutions. There are some folks who say, NIMBY, not in my backyard, meaning I don't want this encampment there, I might not want these tiny homes there. When we worked on the Fair Chance Housing Ordinance, which passed earlier this year in the cities of Oakland and Berkeley, there were folks who were concerned about folks with a criminal record living next door to them. This requires us to not only just have dialogue, but we have to reach out to people who we may not necessarily speak to. There's a tendency to preach to the choir. If we're just preaching to the choir, then we're not engaging folks who need to be part of at that table and part of the fold. When we humanize the issues, that creates a transformation that is needed. And that is what will assist folks in being resilient. It's not enough to ask or to expect or to demand for people who are coming home to do the right thing. We have to every step of the way demonstrate and illustrate that real change, true change is possible. And sticking to the theme of transformation, more often than not, that can only happen with people from shared background and experiences. For example, it's one thing for someone who don't have a record to tell someone like me who does, oh, you can get a job, people will hire you. You don't have to quote unquote mark that box, at least when they have that box on application, right? But when you see someone who come from a similar background, it will give you a sense of hope. If that person is able to do it, so can I. Because at the end of the day, one of the things I really preach is agency. All of us are dealing with systemic oppression. 500 years of white supremacy does not go away with a presidential election. Let's be clear on that. The system is designed to do exactly what it is doing. It is not broken. It's very intentional. It's set up to maintain the status quo. So while we're all engaged in a process of ending systemic oppression and systemic racism, we must also make sure that we're helping folks develop and believe in their own sense of agency. As Carol pointed out, I've been involved in doing this for probably 7 years now. And I can tell you, when I first started, there were folks who would not even allow me to exercise my own agency. There were people who would say, John, you're formerly incarcerated. We want you to share your experiences in front of such and such. But by the way, read these talking points we wrote for you. What? How can you write my experience when I lived it? We got to be mindful of our own privilege. We have to be mindful of our own biases that a lot of us have. Because sometimes when it relates to formerly incarcerated people, there's a tendency to think of us all as being uneducated or undereducated. I'll tell you a secret. I spent 8 years in the California Youth Authority and 5 years in state prison. I always made sure I got a job in 2 places: the kitchen so I could eat physically, and the library so I could eat mentally. So I always shared, they paid me to get an education. I didn't pay to go to school to be taught something. I had the power to pick my own curriculum and pursue it for as long as I can. And the last thing I want to share is this, as it relates to being resilient. I always share with people, don't change who you are, change what you do. That's actually something one of my colleagues told me. Your experiences, whether it's in the streets or incarceration, gave you some valuable tools and skills that you were not learning in university. Use that experience to help fuel your resiliency as you're dealing and navigating with these systems, because it requires a certain amount of mental toughness to survive incarceration. There are these invaluable skills, but sometimes we have a tendency, or we're told, to just throw away our entire past or history to become a new person. Don't. That is part of who you are. Continue to use that as you move forward. I want to share one last thing as I close up, because I'm looking at time. I like to talk. In fact, my mom used to always tell me this. She say, boy, I hope you get a job where they pay you to talk because you can run your mouth. But think about that. That's also a beautiful part and a necessary component of being resilient. It's identifying something that gives you joy. More often than not, people will tell you what you should do. When we say, when people come home, oh, you need a job, everybody don't want a quote unquote dead end job. We have to center what gives people joy, what gives people hope, which allow people to be their full selves. And that would allow that person to not only be resilient enough to get to a place where they're part of the process of transformation and change, but that type of energy is transformative to other people who are watching. So here I am right now. Thank you, Mama. You gave me the fuel. You gave me the faith and the confidence to be sitting here talking right now from a place of joy, a place of power. So at the end of the day, this is about power. We all hold personal power. We have to use that powerful privilege to help one another, leave nobody behind. So I want to thank you all so very much. I want to thank you, Sister Carol and the team over there, because right now, what we're dealing with is going to require all of us to have a sense of agency, not just to help ourselves and our families, but to help each other in this moment. And this is how we convert moments into a movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. How powerful. Just like I knew it would be. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I took some notes. One thing that I took away is that the will to survive will always outweigh the will to obey. That's really profound. Are there any questions in the chat box before we let Brother John go about his day? If you're able to stay with us, we appreciate that, and I'm sure that there'll be more questions as we go on. So thank you, John. And let's move on to our plenary panel, who are really going to kind of lead us through a conversation around mental health, spirituality, looking at some of the disparities that exist, but also they're going to talk about some of the strategies, some of the things that have been successful. And remember, audience, the folks that are here, we're going to be asking you some of those things too. What things are missing from the conversations as we go through this next panel? And as you heard from Brother John, and you heard the prayer from Reverend Leslie early on, what things are missing and what else should we be doing? Because that's going to inform where we go. And again, John, I love you much. And I owe you another phone call. And let's go to Sister Gigi. And I say Sister Gigi because she is in and about lots of churches. We were talking about missing the fellowship during COVID and the connections that come through that. But Gigi is the executive director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Contra Costa County. Gigi is no stranger to this work. She served for many years as the director of ethnic services for the Alameda County Behavioral Health Care System. She's also one of the co-founders of Mental Health Friendly Communities. It's a faith-based, community-defined education and stigma reduction curriculum. Gigi is very active in Contra Costa County, working on behalf of the rights of people who have been marginalized. And so I want to thank you, Gigi, and I'm going to turn it over to you, who Gigi will also be moderating the panel of, I just want to point to the panel that we have Jamie Jeanette from Contra Costa County Health Services. She's with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services. We have Sister Chala Bonner from Safe Return Project. Ronell Ellis is with us. And they're going to have a conversation. Gigi's going to lead it, and I'm going to turn it over to Gigi. Gigi, thank you for working with us on this project.
Thank you so much for having me. I actually feel really blessed this morning because the layout of this program is exactly what we do when we do our trainings with mental health friendly communities, because we know we have to start with prayer. That's essential. We lay out the purpose of the day, we pray, and then we get someone with personal lived experience to share their story so we could put a face on what we're talking about. And for the brother, I'm telling you, if I was back in church, if you were preaching, I would empty out my wallet as we do, which is customary, and I would throw it all on the altar, because you've blessed me, you validated the work that I do. You made me realize I got a little bit more effort that I'm going to pull from somewhere, even through COVID-19, to make sure that we're doing everything we do at NAMI to embrace those from reentry populations. What you shared was right on point. I'm unapologetic about looking at those marginalized communities that often they're not at the table, just like you said. They're under the table, they're serving the food. And I had an experience as the ethnic services manager in Alameda County to work with communities that were marginalized. And so I had an opportunity after that to come to Contra Costa County, my hometown, Antioch, and serve under the ministry of Bishop Dave Hollister. We all have to give honor to our leader also. That's cultural practice that we take. And we're at Church for Me, which our motto is the perfect church for imperfect people. So many of us could have found ourselves in predicaments like the one you found yourself in, but we just didn't get caught. And so we have to be realistic about that. As we were growing up in places like Oakland and East Oakland, there was a lot of temptation around us. In my role at NAMI, I am responsible for making sure families that are impacted by mental illness have the services that they need to better guide their loved ones. So often, individuals have to have contact with the criminal justice system before they ever get a diagnosis. That's true for all populations, but more often is true for Black and Brown individuals. They end up in detention versus getting treatment services. And so I'm supporting those family members, trying to make sure that when that happens, they have the tools they need to advocate for their loved ones. And so having mental health be a part of this conversation is right on point, because I'm a true believer that if you are not able to get the supports you need from your faith community at a very early age, often you will find yourself in systems that are not not going to produce the best you. All of us were put on here on earth, in my belief, to connect to purpose. And there is a more structural, systemic effort to keep certain communities from connecting with their purpose. Because if we all do recognize and carry that queen and king consciousness that's a part of who we are, we would have great outcomes in our community. And so NAMI is there. We're in Concord. We're there for family members. We want to do more work with reentry populations. We do so in the eastern part of the county with just, when we go out and we feed the unsheltered, more often than not, people have had a history of reentry. They're carrying a mindset that because of that, they cannot move on. But we know all things are done, all things are possible through faith practices and a belief. I don't want to push one faith over another, but I really appreciate the work that Leslie does, because Reverend Leslie does, because the reality is Jesus Christ was the #1 social justice champion. And our connection with faith and doing social justice work should come as natural. What we have to put as even just as natural is the work that we're doing in mental health, partnering with faith communities to fill in the gap, to make sure that individuals are getting their needs met. So our mental health friendly communities model, we recognized early on when I was asked, Gigi, in your role as ethnic services manager, you must work with all the ethnic and cultural communities and you must reduce disparities. And I said, how in the world am I going to do that? And they gave me a 3-year time period in which to do it. Where should I look for this support? I go to the cultural broker. So in each community, there's someone who speaks on behalf of the community. And most communities, those are their spiritual and faith leaders. And so you go to them, you train them on how better to support individuals when they're having a difficult time, when they're in reentry, when they're incarcerated. Look, when they are facing a judge, you get the whole church behind it, everybody come together, we're gonna pray that this judge does what's right for this individual. Too often we see they do not make the decisions in fairness to Black, Indigenous people of color. So it's important for the faith community to stand with them and understand what they're going through. And then even more important, to stay with them through that journey while they're incarcerated. Put that money on the books. Do what you need to do to keep that person's spirit intact and provide the hope they need. And so that's a big part of what we do in our efforts with mental health friendly communities, is to get faith leaders to understand, unless the keepers of the flock, the parable of the keepers of the flock is that if one is not with us, then we can't party. We can't party until all come back home, and then we rejoice, right? And so in my work at NAMI, I'm also the FaithNet coordinator, and the most rewarding part of my job is educating faith leaders, educating community members about the important role they play as the shepherd for the lost sheep, the ones that may have gone off of their psychiatric medication and they're wondering, it's not the responsibility of that sheep to find its way, it's the responsibility of the shepherd to find the way. The 99 are not as important as that one when they're in crisis. So we're also working toward that effort, and we're doing it in partnership with the county. And I think all counties have made great progress with better understanding. They can't do it in isolation solo. They have to look at what I call natural partners to do this work. So we're go to our website at NAMI, and we have started some support groups because of COVID-19 that traditionally we probably would not have been able to get away with. We actually have an African-American support group for men of faith who live with mental health. Why? Because again, when state surveys took place, the #1 coping skill for people who live with mental health challenges was prayer. Prayer. I believe it's the most often successful. So when we talk about evidence-based practices, oftentimes we don't look at community-defined strategies. The community-defined strategies are all there, and they lift up when community groups have the opportunity through funding to look at what's been working for us. We say evidence-based practice when we really should be saying practice-based evidence, practices that have been used for a long time periods, but just don't have the funding. Am I going to spend thousands of dollars proving something that I know to be true? Or am I going to use that money to start supporting individuals in a manner consistent with what has been promising when you've done it? So I lift up community-defined strategies, and we're doing more and more of that as we work with reentry populations, because we're taking the lead from them. We're asking them, what worked for you? And I heard I'm going to call it the testimony. There's a difference between telling a story and a testimony. What I heard from Brother John was a testimony, and him sharing his story allows other individuals to share theirs, and it promotes hope and healing. And that's what this work is truly all about, promoting hope and healing. Through COVID-19, we've got many more phone calls from individuals who have loved ones who are incarcerated. They're isolated, they're scared. We're out here, and we're also, I mean, let's be honest, our former First Lady, Michelle Obama, acknowledged the fact that she's probably living with a low level of depression with all the assets that she has. We are in times of uncertainty. Whenever you're in times of uncertainty, when you can't plot out what your future is going to look like from day to day, you are probably someone who needs to talk to someone. Statistically, it's been proven that, yes, we need our clinical folks and we need our spiritual folks. We need to bridge the gap. But as an African-American woman, it's been proven by science that get together with 4 of your sister girlfriends and you're going to get more healing in that hour, 2 hours over a cup of coffee or wine for those who drink wine, than you might get sitting on the couch for someone who has a foreign approach to healing than you have. So I just wanted to come on here. I want to give enough time. I'm going to be moderating the session. NAMI's there for you, our mental health friendly communities model that works with all communities, but often gets siloed to just being specific to African Americans, but it works for all. I go all over the county and I share what mental health is, what it isn't, and how faith communities can better support any individual in need. But as I said, we're lifting up the unsheltered and reentry populations, because in this time of uncertainty, that's what people need to look to. Those that I always tell people from a public health perspective, you start working with the indie group that's hurt most and you benefit everyone. Mm-hmm. Try the strategies in the group that is the most marginalized. And I'm just going to say, here in Contra, Costa County, go visit our criminal justice mental health for juveniles or for adults, and you're going to see more people who are from my community. Start putting strategies in place for those communities, and then you'll see improvements for others because you can apply the principles. But use the cultural brokers from those communities to support you in your effort. For me, I'm almost 6 feet tall. It would not make sense for me to be applying for a job as the buyer at a boutique clothing store. So sometimes you have to understand the role you play. And as an ally, support efforts, but you should not be the biggest voice if your living experience doesn't line up with the group that needs the most support. So I appreciate my opportunity to speak, and we couldn't do this work without partners in this. And I'm getting very, very familiar with being on panels with Jamie Jeanette. She does great work for the county around solutions for supporting individuals who are currently unsheltered, and programs are in place. And I'm going to have Jamie speak now and share some data that she has, and she'll give the rest of her background. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to start. I'm loving this group already, and there's a concept in Judaism that's tikkun olam. It basically translates to repairing the world, and it's this idea that all of us are on this planet to repair the world in whatever ways that we can, with whatever gifts and strengths and talents we have. And it's just clear that that seems to be like a driving value of the people in this group, and I am glad to be among you. So I am Jamie Jeanette. I'm with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services, and that's the county homeless program. And I just wanted to talk a little bit today about homelessness in our county, and specifically, you know, how homelessness and lack of housing impacts people that are reentering the community. So homelessness is clearly a huge, huge issue for people that are reentering. We know that not having stable housing can really be a factor in people reentering the system. And so I just wanted to paint a quick picture of kind of what's out there. So the county health department has a couple of different roles, but we also we help. Part of what we do is help coordinate this big network of providers that are offering homeless services. And I don't know how many of you tried to access homeless services either for yourselves or for people you're connected to, 5+ years ago, but it used to be super complicated and you'd have to know all the players and you'd have to like try all these doors. And what we've come to in the last couple of years is a more streamlined approach where there's really 3 points of entry, ideally, where you can call 211, and I see that 211 is here represented in the group. So you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can actually talk to a live person, and they can start to connect folks with what's available. And there are so many resources in our community. There's no way that anybody can keep, that list of what's available in their head. 211 does that. You can also walk into what's called a care center. So those are brick and mortar sites where somebody can just walk in and access food and showers and laundry, but also case managers that can start to connect people to what's available. So right now we have one in Richmond, so that's GRIP, and the other one's in Walnut Creek, that's Trinity Center. And then the third way that we have for people to connect to homeless services is called our core outreach teams. And we now have more than 14 teams, I think, and they're scattered around the county. And some of them are actually working with specific populations, including a team that's working specifically with folks that are incarcerated. And what they do is they actually can come out to people if they're living unsheltered. They are actually doing visits with the county jails, to basically, as people are getting released, make sure that they can connect with folks as they're being released, so that they're not just discharged to the street with no idea where to go in the middle of the night, maybe in a part of the county that is totally unfamiliar or possibly hostile. And so the core teams are really designed to help get to people that are vulnerable and start to connect them in with resources. So in terms of what's available specifically for folks that are re-entering the community, there's a couple of different programs, and most of them, like there's specific resources and funding, and for the most part, people are getting referred to those by either their parole officer, probation, or there's a couple of agencies that are funded specifically to do reentry work. But people can also start to get connected in with reentry services through those entry points. And I want to talk a little bit about COVID because I imagine, it's wreaked havoc on the work that you do and made things a lot harder. We know, right, that a lot of folks have been released from incarceration, maybe early, without any sort of discharge planning. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about how the county has responded to COVID for people experiencing homelessness specifically. So when the pandemic first hit, we had a number of big shelters that we would call congregate shelters, right? Those are like sort of what you think of as like a big room with a bunch of people in it. And that obviously was kind of a nightmare if you're thinking about the spread of COVID. So we quickly moved people out of those congregate shelters and into hotels. And I do have a little bit of data about folks that were in. So we have about, from the data that I have, and I actually need to do a second pass on the data, looks like there's about 35-ish people that are from what we would call reentry population. And part of why those numbers are so low is that the entry for the hotel program is really based on medical criteria. So it's really for the most medically vulnerable people. So folks that are over 65, folks that have existing medical conditions. And so that's part of why you may not see the same proportion of people that are re-entering in the hotel program as you would in sort of the general shelters. But folks that are in the hotels, there is housing navigation, there's case management. They're really working on getting people housed and out of the hotels and into stable housing. I took a quick look at our data just to look as people hit homeless services, we sort of track in what's called HMIS. It's our Homeless Management Information System. And so we can see a lot of different data about people that are accessing homeless services. And so it looked like in the past year, we had about 1,500 people that were formerly incarcerated that have accessed homeless services. And that's, I don't have the data of like what proportion that is. Oh, so I see a question. So referral vehicle to help people get housed in the hotel. So if you have folks that are seeking hotel entry, the best way actually, if they're unhoused, is to call 211 and reach out to a CORE outreach team. And CORE is basically facilitating getting people connected with the screening process for the hotels. And then once people are in the hotel program, there are actually staff there that are working on getting people housed. And they are skilled in working with folks that may have, some extra barriers to housing. So folks with perhaps a felony history or other outstanding challenges that may make it harder for them to get housed. The housing navigators are really trained to help sort of figure out how to navigate different systems and get them the available resources. So the other thing I wanted to say is that we, as a homeless system of care, are really working on a system-wide strategy around equity and really institutionalizing and building in equity as the lens through which we see all our work. And I really appreciated what Jones said. Every system gets the results that it's designed to get, right? We know that. So we need to figure out how do we shift our system so that we get better results. So we're actually participating in a regional initiative with a cohort of a bunch of other community partners to identify options for where we can improve things in our system of care. And that's including partners in the Office of Reentry and Justice. And then in terms of partnerships, we're always, part of my role is really, I sort of face out, if you have our homeless service providers, I sort of face out from them to everyone else. So all of the community partners that maybe aren't exclusively focused on homelessness, but they're concerned about it, or they have people in their system or in their work that are experiencing homelessness. I can be that reference point and then get people connected in with the right folks in our system. So we're always really looking for new partners, and so if you have questions or thoughts, definitely reach out to me, and I can help connect you with the right people in our circle. So I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot, and then I'm happy to answer other questions that may come up.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that overview. We really appreciate it. And we're just hoping that when we start talking about partnerships, we expand to, we heard how important it is for us to be culturally effective, to also consider partnerships with natural resources like those found in faith communities. I am so excited to now be able to introduce a young person. And when you do this kind of work, it can wear on you. You can get burnt out. So it's always beneficial when you can look to the future and see young people who are just as passionate doing this work. So I'm going to introduce you now to Shayla Bonner, who works over at Safe Return Project. She's going to tell you a little bit more about herself and then share some important information about the work that she does with Reentry.
Thank you so much, Gigi. Thank you all for letting me hold space. So good morning, everyone. My name is Shayla Bonner, and I'm the lead organizer and program manager at the Safe Return Project. Our mission is to end mass incarceration and re-enfranchise those who have been disenfranchised by the criminal justice system. We are deeply invested in building power, political power, social power, and economic levels of formerly incarcerated persons across the state of California. And we do that by addressing, the root causes of poverty and the impact of the criminal justice system that has on Black and Brown people. So I just wanted again to thank you all for allowing me to take up space in this panel. I wanted to talk to you all today about my personal experience during this pandemic, We know that 2020 has definitely been a challenging year for our community. We have dealt from everything from the pandemic to homelessness to police brutality. And although Safe Return Office is closed to the public, we are still working very hard, working very diligently to serve our community. So what we do, we did have to pivot a lot during the pandemic. We are currently working remotely, either from home. Some staff do go to the office, and which can be definitely challenging, especially for those who are formerly incarcerated just being released. Internet access is challenging. Having Wi-Fi, having a mobile device to contact folks for resources is definitely a challenge. However, over the past few months, we've been able to engage in the community, specifically in East County, where we, went out seeing, what the public needs, what the community needs during COVID. We did a brief little survey on what concerns the community the most. And there was one man in particular who told me his story, how he just got released from being incarcerated over 15 years. Before incarceration, he was out on his own since the age of 16, didn't really have any family to take care of him, got into a lot of trouble, was also sexually abused. And it's like, just listening to that story alone, it's like, we need so much in our county, anything from housing to homelessness, mental health services is huge. And that was just heartbreaking to hear what he went through as a child and how he didn't have someone there to back him up. There was no counselor that he could see, no therapist that he could see because he didn't have medical. So in my opinion, I think the top two priorities that we should really focus on is housing and mental health. This year, we did a lot of work around early release due to the pandemic. I actually lead the DA accountability table for Safe Return Project, and we meet with DA Becton frequently to discuss, resentencing, releasing folks who are, at high risk of COVID, those who are over 55, those who have less than 6 months left on their sentencing, and those who have health issues, such as diabetes or any immune deficiency diseases. But as we were having those conversations, one thing that, the table was thinking about was okay, if we get all these folks released, where they're going to go? Do they have family members that they can, go stay with? Do they have transportation? Who's going to pick them up? Things like that. And so as we started to discussing that, we were looking at who we can actually partner with. So we contacted the shelters. We contacted other partners such as Rubicon. And I know that they were working remotely at that time too. So it's just a lot that went into it. And then the one thing that came up, and big shout out to John Jones III for the fair chance housing. We were looking into our fair chance housing for Richmond because we know that, for those who are on low income leases or government assistance leases, they can't have a someone who's convicted of a felon to be on their lease. So that was another barrier that we had to look at. So it was just a lot of challenging things that we wanted to address as we go into, folks who are being released early. And like I said, housing and mental health has been the top two priority, especially when it comes to I'm also co-lead the Racial Justice Coalition. And so housing equity is definitely part of that. And just, trying to think of ways how we could funnel money from our general fund or from our county's budget into community-based organizing, into housing for formerly incarcerated folks. And so that was some things that we were looking at. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that although we pivoted and started doing leadership development online, We start hosting healing circles online. Again, like mental health is huge. And so there's this quote that says, hurt people hurt people. So we wanted to allow the community space to, although we can't come together physically, come together virtually to go through triggers, traumas. How can we heal from those traumas so that we can heal our community? And so I'm like super excited to continue that work. And I'm not sure if you have any questions for me, Gigi, or if there's anyone in the chat who has any questions. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for allowing that space for me.
Thank you, Shayla. I think in the interest of time and to allow Mr. Ronell Ellis to have an opportunity to speak, we'll have an opportunity to have the Q&A a little later. But thank you, Young Queen, for your perspective, and especially appreciate you highlighting the need for mental health support, recognizing that housing is the #1 priority here in this county, but mental health, hey, if you don't have your housing, and be mentally balanced. So introducing Ronell Ellis from Health Right 360.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful panel and all the different subjects we're talking about, especially the population of reentry is where I lay my hat at. John said a mouthful. I thought I was the only one that felt like that, about the traumatization of, incarceration and then, being a Black person and where I'm from and my community and all that. I was really confused about my place in the world. I didn't think I belonged, and there was a lot of bad information that I received from my community because of the non-educational people who were providing the information to me. So I can go back and see that I was getting information from a wounded source, right? A very wounded source. Man, almost nothing in the cupboard when it comes to positive information. Health Right 360 is a wonderful organization. It's a comprehensive approach to, everything. We have a parent company in San Francisco that provides a myriad of services, from AOD services to health clinic with Haight-Ashbury free clinics. We have about, probably 20 plus programs under our umbrella. It originated as Walden House, which was a program that I personally, was a part of twice. And the second time around, I started that program in 1984 as a young adult. And I went back in 92. And from 92, I've been clean and sober and a participant in society in a better form of myself. But Health Right 360 provides a number of services. Out here in Contra, Costa County, we have a more narrow scope as far as the reentry population. We serve folks getting out of jails and prisons. We kind of are supposed to serve folks who are AB 109 targeted, but we help everybody. We don't discriminate when it comes to that because we know how tough it is to re-enter into society. We call folks who are being released from incarceration returning residents. Not all of our returning people are citizens, right? They may not be necessarily citizens, but they are residents of this community and this county. And so we want to incorporate them in everything that we do. So I'm glad to be here. And speaking on what John, kind of piggybacking on what John was talking about, I'm a layman, right? And so when I was incarcerated for many years from juvenile, just like John, from juvenile to adult, it's a scary place when you're trying to navigate and you don't have the tools. Your options are very limited. And so what we try to do is provide resources for folks who have limited options and expand their options and try to give them hope. That's one word I believe in as well. sharing your story, talking about your testimony, allows other folks to identify what you've gone through. And so they can, once somebody can identify with your plight, they're more comfortable, right? Sharing about their plight. And so therefore you bring them into the fold and incorporate them into what you're trying to do, what you're trying to allow them to express. Before I was able to do that, I felt kind of isolated and as Ms. Bonner said, disenfranchised, right? And I didn't even know the level of my my personal, what we call PTSD from the life of crime and addiction and incarceration until I was really educated about it. I was doing well once I got my life together and started really being more productive. You know, I got employment. I was able to get married. I curbed my addiction. I cut my recidivism. I got off parole. And I did all these things. I expunged my record. I'm waiting for a pardon. I did all this stuff, but I was lost because I still didn't qualify for much, right? I'm still a convicted felon. You know, couldn't, you know, like Ms. Bonner said, you know, it's the criminal justice system is the gift that keeps on punishing, right? It don't keep on giving, but it keeps on giving punishment. And even Newt Gingrich, who is somebody I don't agree with, said that it's one of the systems that in the world that makes no sense. They keep punishing you after you've paid your price. You know, you get a sentence in court and you think that's, you know, the price you have to pay. And it's just basically tons of red tape after that. And you just can't get out of the red tape. It's like caution tape, red tape, you know, film, all kinds of things that you wrapped up in. And so for me, that's what I had to overcome. And until I really got educated about that, it was real difficult for me to really overcome all of my barriers, as we spoke earlier about the barriers. There's like, you know, I don't know, maybe hundreds of barriers or maybe even thousands of barriers that folks face when trying to get from point A to point B with transitional success from incarceration to a more productive person in society. And so, you know, the layman piece, putting together all kinds of services and resources, going out and trying to speak to those who need help. As far as us changing things around in the pandemic, most of our services are being provided because one thing we do in East County that's a little different than West County and the Success Center, even though we're partners, is that we go into the field. So me and a couple of my coordinators that I work with, my colleagues, we go out and we meet the folks where they are. We have to really go out and go into their homes or, you know, meet them in places that are safe for them, public places, whatever it may be. And we go out and we serve them in that manner and in that nature. And so we don't want a barrier to be that you have to get to us, right? Because transportation, bus fare, BART fare, Uber, whatever it may be, our folks don't have that a lot of times. And that's why, you know, we met with despair coming out of incarceration or being released because, you know, the hope is dim, right? It's very dim when you don't even have transportation to get home. I mean, even when you get out of prison now, they hold your gate money. Used to give you $200 or then they start giving you $100 and you get the other $100 from the parole officer. And now they don't give you nothing. They give you some kind of card and they load it up and it's halftime, it's not working and it don't have a value on it. And you got to catch Greyhound just to get from prison to home. So some counties not even accepting parolees. I mean, it's amazing. And you've done your time. You've served your time. So just speaking to all the different things might just be throwing things out there, but not really uniform or formal around what I'm trying to say. But I'm affected by it. I'm impacted by it. I'm removed from incarceration, but I'm not removed from how it affected me and how it affected others. And so we just here as an agency and you know, we under the direction of ORJ and Mr. Dante Blue, and man, grateful to have him and many others who work in this community in order to make progress. Jamie and all the folks, core group, all of them, we work with everybody. And what can they do to help us even more is just be who they are, continue to take our referrals and then also give us referrals as well, and continue to serve the public and serve this population. And hopefully we can make some serious headway and, cutting down recidivism or eliminating, annihilating and eliminating that stuff, because cutting down is nice. We really want to, obliterate that stuff and really make it disappear to really have some equality. So.
Thank you so much, Ronell. Powerful words. I'm hearing you say, let's make this training transformational. Let's put some action into it. So when lifting the words off, I make up words from time to time. Now we're going to move on over to Carol, who I think have a couple of Q&A questions for some of us on this panel. Thank you, Carol.
Hi, thank you. So Jemana, I'm going to go to you to see if we have any questions for the panelists. And if you can put those in my chat or in the chat. First of all, I want to thank you all for sharing. It is evident that you have the passion, that you bring skills and expertise and unique perspectives in this room. And I want to say that the voices that we heard from today are sometimes the voices that you rarely hear. And those are the voices that we need to hear more often and more consistently as we guide towards strategies. So right now, I don't see, well, actually we have one question. What are some things that we should do more of to heal, to promote healing in our community? And I would ask that any of the panelists could answer that one. And then I actually have 3 other questions. So let's start with that one.
I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. We have to look beyond providers who are already in the system, who have a head start when an RFP come out, and start looking at providers that connect with the community week to week in faith settings. It needs to happen. Thank you. To be more culturally responsive, it needs to happen. They can partner with Health Right, they can partner with Safe Returns and the county to ensure that we're not leaving anyone behind. Thanks.
Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that?
I would definitely agree with Gigi on that. We've done a number of healing circles at Safe Return, and they are very effective. Folks come in, torn, broken, heavy burden, and they leave like restored and have some type of hope going forward. So I definitely will second what Gigi said.
Okay. And so this question is for Ronell. How has Health Right 360 addressed health and racial disparities for people under correctional supervision?
Well, we try to build health through taking care of folks who need to be fed in many ways. And so as far as racial disparities, we know that there's disparities in the justice system and the reentry population. And so what we try to do is bring the folks in and provide resources and services specifically targeted to those who are of African American and Latino backgrounds. And so, even with the voting situation, we try to make sure we explain this whole thing flat out from A to Z, because folks who are from communities of color really don't know everything about some of the systems that are in place. So we don't just want to just cover things up with a blanket, but we want to just systematically take things apart so that we can educate our folks from the core. So in those racial disparities, we try to do that. We try to make sure that we don't overlook that when dealing with our population.
Thank you. The next question is similar to Ms. Bonner. How does your organization apply a health equity lens to address the needs of those most impacted by the criminal justice system?
Yeah, so our organization is a part of the Racial Justice Coalition. We help co-lead that coalition. And we kind of put health equity, housing, and justice reinvestment all into one bubble. I feel like they kind of intersect in a number of different ways, especially health and housing. I feel like, you know, in order to be healthy, I feel like you have to have some type of shelter. I can't see myself living out in the streets and being healthy, not having a place to cook a healthy meal or, you know, shower properly, keeping up good hygiene. So what we do, there's a number of organizations in that group, such as like the Nurses Association, who, of course, many of you may know, is definitely advocating for healthcare for all. And so we just try to like push that agenda, like we need healthcare, it's a necessity. People should not be disenfranchised or discriminated against because they don't have the funds or the means to pay for proper healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how we advocate for that.
Right. So the last question is to Jamie. And so Jamie, how has the county, how can the county partner, how can county partners, excuse me, help meet the needs by partnering with your organization to better serve people who are returning home?
It's a really good question. And I think this is actually an area where, as a system of care, we're trying to think even more carefully and be really intentional about building partnerships and relationships. And I think now departments like probation and parole are starting to put funding into our system so that they're not also trying to do housing. You know, like the expertise of what we bring for expertise is like, we are the experts at providing homeless services and also getting people housed. And so I definitely encourage folks, and particularly, you know, other systems and agencies to reach out to us, and we can figure out ways to partner so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel, and that there's ways that we can both do what we do best in service of the people that we want to help, you know, get back on their feet and live the biggest, fullest, most independent lives possible.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So definitely reach out to me and I can connect you to the right folks.
Great. So as we close, panel, I'll allow each one of you to give some closing remarks, and then we'll go into our breakout sessions to hear from the folks who've been listening. So any closing remarks? We'll start with you, Gigi, as the moderator, and thank you.
I would just remind people that mental health is really a big part of healing, as is housing. So if you need services, I give out my number because I don't want anyone to have to experience any type of struggle when there's services available. So it's on our website, 510-990-2670. Call me if you're in despair and need support, and I'll connect you with someone who can support you, especially if you're someone who's struggling after having been incarcerated. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Gigi. Any other last words from the panelists?
This is Jamie. I was just going to add, I always find it very powerful to hear from people with lived experience in a way that's not exploitative of their experiences, but like the amount of wisdom and power and creative thinking that I've heard just in this little group. I think I was thinking about the question earlier about healing, and I think that can really be a catalyst for change, both with policymakers and other decision makers. So it's one of the things we're trying to build into our system, figuring out how to amplify the voices of people that have lived experience. And I just think that's a really powerful tool for moving some of the policy issues and strategy forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Carol, I just wanted to mention something we did do at Health Right 360 Reentry Network during this pandemic. My colleague Hector created an app, and this app is available to all of our partners and our participants. And so we created this app in order to have even more resources available to those who are returning home from incarceration. And so Hector just put that in the chat. He's also on board in the today's audience rather. And so I just want to remind everybody about that. It's new and it's something we've created, and it was homegrown and organic through one of my colleagues. So we're proud of that, and we're trying to, give that a whole nother platform. So folks can just get into that old phone, whatever kind of phone they got, and they can pull up all the resources for all our partners and everything in the app. So thank you.
That's great. That's great. Okay, anyone else? Ms. Bonner?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Not much to say. I just want to thank you all again for allowing me to come and speak. The panelists have been great. Ronell, like, he was super dope. Like, Health Right 360, all the partners here. Let's continue to work together, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can you pull up the slide for the listening sessions, please? Jemana. And I want to say behind the scenes working is Jemana Harris, who is a dual legacy graduate intern. And also Summer Jackson, who's a project manager with Dual Legacy Group. We call it JLG. And Summer is not speaking today because she has a cold. But they're behind the scenes making it feel easy. Or look easy, and it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. But they are doing it, and I just want to appreciate and acknowledge them. So in our small group sessions, and as you, they are already working to assign you to small groups. So you don't have to do anything except, I think you have to say yes when it pops on your screen. And if you're on the phone, you need to be looking for that, because we're going to be moving people into sessions, into small groups randomly. So each one of the facilitators, we have 3 facilitators, and it looks like I need to serve as a facilitator too. But we have Coach Brian, who is going to be a facilitator. And also we have Miss Robin. I am getting to Robin's last name.
Well, I'll just jump in, Carol, because I have assigned the room. So Brian will be in breakout room 1. Pat Mims will be leading breakout room 2. Robin Nicole Livingston will lead 3, and then Carol will lead room 4. Once I push open the room, you'll just click accept, and then we will just take maybe 15 minutes to kind of go over 2 questions. They'll ask you 2 questions. They're going to ask you for a volunteer person to take notes, and then we're going to come back together to share some of the highlights of your conversation. So.
And there you have it. So the 2 questions are, what else is missing? And what resources, policies, and program recommendations would you add to build stronger services for people returning to communities after incarceration, and for people under correctional supervision and the families that support them? So it's 2 questions. Summer, you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
All right, everyone get ready to be transported.
Yes, it feels magical.
Okay. You should be getting your invitations right now. Here we go. Okay. There you go.
Hey Gigi, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Well,
Good.
Okay, you can just join your room. 1, 2, 3. And
room. We have 47 people that came back. Summer, is that about it?
yeah, so we have a couple minutes to have the groups share.
Okay.
Then we will do some closing remarks and let everyone go for the day.
Yeah, yes. Well, I love efficiency, especially when the content is rich. So we're going to do this popcorn style. You know what popcorn style means? It means, it's going like that. And so since I'm going to facilitate, I'm going to ask the person, Jamie, who was my scribe, to report back from our group some high points. We're going to collect all those notes and we're going to take it back to the planning group, which I'll have a chance to say something about before we close today. So I believe we have, why don't we start with Coach Brian up in the far right corner of my screen. And let's see how he demonstrates popcorn style report back. Hey, Brian.
Put me on the spot. I like that. I appreciate it. So I'm not exactly sure who my scribe was, but we're going to kind of just popcorn through the room. I think Roosevelt had a pretty compelling, all-comprehensive kind of pre-release program that he would like to talk about. So I'll let him go first, and then we'll popcorn to Gigi next.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I just wanted to say that if we don't start while a person is incarcerated, you cannot really get a good read in on who's going where and how they're going to be when they get there, how successful they will be based on what they have when they get there. If you don't point things out ahead of time, it's just all for naught, really, to me. And when I say comprehensive pre-release, that means that pre-release will have to be in state prison as well as county jail. It has to be across the board. So all services will be known. There are some people getting out of prison still think that parole is still the same old run from the gate parole. Like Ronell saying, he's waiting for his $200 to come across the counter. And it doesn't come. He gets a card. So, had they been educated prior.
Okay.
Gigi, will you go next, please? Thanks, Roosevelt. Great job.
Well, I just shared that we have to be really much more intentional in our hiring to be reflective of those who we are serving. And I lifted up mental health once again around making sure that we're also working with the families and have an opportunity to reunify individuals to start building relationships again so that the individuals who are coming home have an opportunity to go remove some of those barriers and fears that families may have around embracing them.
Thank you, Gigi. Ms. Michelle Stewart, you had some great ideas around the true investment. Will you talk about that, please?
So, yeah, my thinking was that, if we really want people to be successful re-entering the community, that we really do need to make deeper investments, kind of following a person, from exit to the point that they are on their own feet. And that doesn't just mean, oh, you got a job, but they've got a career-oriented job, and they are moving toward all of their goals and whatnot. And, you know, recognizing that that's a really expensive proposition, but it's well worth it.
Mhm.
It's well worth it. And if we could stop working in silos, that would help support that.
So Brian, can we go on to the next group, or do you have more?
Yes, I'd like to try to just call on Colleen and Ms. Bonner, just in case you had anything you wanted to offer also.
One thing that I just wanted to add that I talked about in the group was just expanding the resources across the county. I feel like more resources in West County than there are in East County. And so to bridge that gap, we just need to like find more resources, more CBOs, more faith-based organizations to fill in that gap. That's all.
Thank you. Colleen, did you want to go as well?
Just real quick, I just chimed in about how, you know, to add on to the you know, comprehensive reentry was to, you know, get the kind of Johns and Rennells inside to start sharing about, you know, their empowerment stories and, you know, reaching individuals pre-release so that they can see that there's a hope for what's life after incarceration.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see, Robin's group, was Robin a facility? Yes, Robin, there you are. Hi.
Hi, Robin Nicole. My group, Helen was our scribe, Helen Parati.
So something that I kind of added to our group discussion was how we were speaking about bridging a gap that's missing in terms of getting information that's there across the board to where our population is, who they're encountering. I'm a probation officer, so I have people showing up randomly. So I kind of just thought maybe having just a static list of information on our wall that we could maybe give that they know that, you know, I know information changes very quickly, but they have something at least concrete like 211 or other resources out there that could benefit them that on one paper. So just to bring together all the people who we see represented today, have their information there. So if they come across me or they here at the office to see me, they can also take a paper, something with basic information that they may not have access to the Wi-Fi. They may not have a phone. Most of them don't. A lot of guys don't who just show up. So depending on them being able to use the internet is not always going to work. So they may need something basic, just like next steps of, hey, here, this person has this on this day. Somebody has another resource for them on a different day so that they can have a little bit of a blueprint of how to navigate in the community.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm sorry, Robin?
No, I was just saying, yes, exactly. That's where a lot of it comes up. Jill, who's from Supervisor Anderson's office, you know, made a good point about the communication breakdown between agencies becomes problematic as well. And I said, you know, it's important for us to be able to direct people to certain places and they know they can get this help here, they can get this help there. And as opposed to calling around and trying to figure out a website or something where it seems like it should be simple enough to do, but a lot of the things that they are experiencing is very traumatic and we can't always see the trauma, but the trauma is there, and asking them to reacclimate and do things on their own sometimes is not realistic and people get lost in the shuffle.
Thank you, Robin. With 3 minutes left, we have 2 more report outs. Who is the other?
I'll go, Carol.
Yes, Dante is our scribe, Pat Mims facilitator. Go ahead, Dante.
Yeah, certainly. So I think in our what's missing, a lot of our conversation centered around how to actually make this conversation better, where the group said that they'd like to see more variety of programs represented, along with more voices from the formerly incarcerated. There was also a question around, or a desire to see some of the justice system itself involved in the conversation to be kind of part of the system's change. You needed to have the system actors as part of that process. Lastly, there was this question around, I think there would be a deeper dive into housing, and specifically in terms of how this population is able to bridge from release into long-term housing. So what does that look like, and how can a person be supported to make that occur? The last things is that less silos. Also, there's a preference for understanding that when people come out of incarceration, there's 1,000 things happening, and so we have to try to centralize things as much as possible to support people when they're in that situation. So I'll leave it there.
And just one last thing about that piece is that Alameda County is 95 minutes away from Contra Costa County, and Alameda County does not know that there are hubs in Contra Costa County for reentry services. There is definitely a disconnect regionally to share services.
Got it. Got it. All right, Jamie, take it away.
Sure. The sort of overarching theme was about pre-release planning and making sure that people have a plan and the resources they need, like their ID and social security cards and whatnot, so that when they hit the ground, they actually know what's coming and they know where to connect. And people are talking about, like, there's lots of resources, but it's really hard for people to figure out how to navigate. The other thing we talked about was just around mental health and thinking about, like, making sure that there's not just crisis services, but that communities are educated about what mental health struggles look like and how to get support and resources before there's a big crisis. In terms of policies, sort of fundamental is, like, keep working on policies that dismantle white supremacy, because that is what is holding all of this in place. And policies that reduce barriers to housing. And again, like, just creating efficiencies, like institutionalizing, having like case managers or that pre-release planning, so that it's just turnkey, both for state prisons and county jails.
Got it.
And vocational training.
That's right, vocational training. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I believe I'm biased. I think this was an amazing 2 hours. And as we approach the last 4 minutes, I won't take it all up. I'll go in 2 minutes before, but I do want to just acknowledge we had a planning committee that helped move this forward. And I want to acknowledge them. I want to acknowledge Monica Carlisle and Dante Blue. I want to acknowledge Erica McWhorter, Pat Mims and Ronell Ellis and Robin Nicole Livingston and Stephanie Medley from the RISE Center. And I want to thank our facilitators, Coach Brian Burton, who's my nephew. I can just ask him to do whatever at the last minute, and he says yes. I want to thank the team, Summer and also Summer Jackson, but also Jamana Harris. But most of all, I want to thank all of our panelists and all of you that are in the room, because you care about this issue, because you care about our community, and because you care about each other. And so with that, look forward to 3 more trainings. The next one that will happen will be more likely to be on juveniles. And we'll do part 2 on adults. So we'll take what we heard here and design something. We'll work with the planning committee to design something that advances this conversation. And then we'll do the same thing with part 2 with juveniles, with young adults and transition age youth. So with that, I want to thank you. Remember all of the wonderful things that you heard about self-care. That goes for you too. You take care of yourself, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we put a link to the chat in the chat for our evaluation. So if you have a moment before you leave, just click it and share your thoughts about today. Thank you.
2 minutes to complete the evaluation. Thank you.